Israeli apartheid.
So we asked for a Ukraine working group. It was denied. So we were in the crazy position that Veterans for Peace had a Russia working group permitted, but a Ukraine work not permitted. So they outright banned us, said, no, you cannot call yourselves Veterans for Peace Ukraine working group.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to the Struggle Video News. Here's an action for justice for Palestine from No Tech for Apartheid at an Amazon meeting.
Right here, right now, Amazon tech workers and Amazon warehouse workers are rallying to say that they will not have their labor used for the profit of Israeli apartheid and the destruction of Palestinian lives. Will you choose to be on the right side of history? Listen to your workers and stop providing tech to Israeli apartheid. No tech for apartheid. No tech for apartheid.
As such, I'm here to express my deep concern with the Israeli military and government's contract with Amazon and Google known as Project Nimbus. This contract provides powerful technology to an army that's been accused of war crimes and a government that's enforcing a repressive system of apartheid.
I remember when I was working for Amazon and they were tracking us, you know, like when you were here, your assignments, but you had to go to the lunchroom, which is that silver building over there, and you were expected to get there within 15 minutes, eat, and then get back over here. So all that tracking stuff is something that started with just simple trying to police workers.
Project Nimbus includes a specific agreement with Israel's land authority. This is the authority that's responsible for kicking Palestinians out of their homes, expelling them, forcing them out overnight, and then giving their homes, their lands, to Israeli settlements, to Israeli settlers.
A way to get active on the issue is to go to meetings sponsored for Dr. Mazen Kumsia of the Palestinian Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability. He's on a tour in the U.S. Northeast, starting in Connecticut on August 8th and 9th. Go to thestruggle.org for details. And watch our show from last week for my new interview with Dr. Kumsia. This is the headline for an editorial in the Israeli paper Haaretz. At a time during the supposed fight for Israeli democracy, a strange law was passed in the Israeli Knesset without any significant opposition. It doubles the penalty for sexual offenses in the event that the crime was committed out of a nationalist motive. The bill's explanation claims every day there are reports of women being sexually harassed on the basis of their religious identity. Read between the lines, as the Haaretz editors did. They say, horrifyingly, this immoral law, which makes the punishment fit the offender's race, one punishment for a Jewish rapist and another for an Arab rapist. Only one Jewish member of the parliament voted against the bill. This at a time when an ultra-Orthodox woman in Israel pickets the Knesset, demanding that a rabbi she said raped her repeatedly remains at liberty. Perhaps they should call this law the Meir Kahane Sex Crimes Act. Middle East Eye looks at this matter in this way.
Israel's parliament passed a sexual terrorism law which gives Palestinians a heavier punishment than Jewish Israelis when it comes to sexual assault, rape, and harassment against Jewish women if the court deems there is a nationalistic motive. The law disproportionately targets Palestinian citizens of Israel, as penalties of convicted Palestinians can now be doubled with a maximum jail sentence of 16 years.
The new law does not protect Jewish women better from crimes by Jewish men, since Jewish men cannot be proved to have a terrorist, nationalist, or racist motivation while committing an offense.
The bill co-sponsorship by both the far-right Jewish Power Party and an opposition faction raised eyebrows. showcasing rare bipartisan support amid a political crisis over judicial reforms. However, critics assert that the law is discriminatory and exploits victims of sexual violence for racist and nationalist motives. Women's rights activists argue that the new law reflects the ideology of Jewish supremacy and underscores the growing influence of ultra-nationalist discourse in Israeli politics. And the law was further met with widespread condemnation from various other quarters, who believe that it perpetuates inequalities and hinders progress towards gender equality in the country. In May this year, Israel ranked last out of 38 Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries in its Gender Equality Index. So, what are your thoughts about punishment for sexual offenders being based on their ethnic background?
The movie Oppenheimer is all the rage. Haven't seen it, but talking about his misgivings about the H-bomb is quite useful, especially this week marking the anniversary of the nuclear massacres of Japanese during World War II. Whatever hesitations he had, however, didn't stop him from supporting Israel's nuclear program. Haaretz had an article about it this week. It included a photo of Oppenheimer with Prime Minister Ben-Gurion at the opening of the Nuclear Research Institute in Rehovot in 1958. There's a messed up situation in the U.S. left. A good slice of it opposes U.S. imperialism, but supports Russian and Chinese imperialism. Others take the foolish view that all wars are like World War I and there should be a plague on all their houses. That brings us to Veterans for Peace, which recently expelled Andy Berman, a 25-year member, because he supports the rights of Syrians and Ukrainians. I interviewed him this week, and here's a part of the interview.
One thing that I really enjoyed was there was an annual stand down, which is a day that the Veterans Administration would allow any veteran to come to the armory, get a physical checkup, get a dental checkup, speak to a lawyer about any legal issues, get food stamps, whatever needs they wanted. And VVAW and Vets for Peace were in charge of the kitchen. So we would boil up 500 hot dogs, salads, all sorts of wonderful delights for the veterans that were coming. It was really very satisfying. But also we were involved in political protests against U.S. intervention everywhere. So I had been a member, or I was a member of Veterans for Peace for over 25 years. At some point, I had to leave Chicago. I got diagnosed with something called chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which is something you get from Agent Orange, but I hadn't been a GI in Vietnam, so I couldn't claim it as caused by military service. But in any case, the Veterans Administration was perfectly willing to take on my care, and they have, and they still do it to this day. And they've done a wonderful job. As you can see, I'm alive and well after many years of having this blood cancer. So that's how I got involved with Veterans for Peace. Now, when I moved to Minneapolis, I immediately looked up the Veterans for Peace chapter, and I joined it here. And it wasn't quite as friendly, I thought, as the one in Chicago, but they were not really nice folks, and we did a lot of things. Demonstrations, protests, social gatherings, what have you.
So when did problems start?
That's a good question. Problems began in earnest when the conflict in Syria broke out, when this fascist dictator, Bashar al-Assad, was suppressing a popular uprising with poison gas against his own people, dropping things called barrel bombs on housing, which would bury children alive, literally bury them alive in the rubble of their houses, an absolute horror. And the vice president of Veterans for Peace, Condon at the time, joined a delegation of a group called the U.S. Peace Council, which is really a terrible name because they were aligned with Assad as well. Their argument was the U.S. is the cause of all these issues, of all the troubles, and the U.S. was opposed to Assad, so Assad must be good. And they backed Assad, and I spoke out against it. And there was a group in Minneapolis of Syrian Americans and their supporters that was called CISPOS, CISPOS. That was in honor of CISPES, Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. We called ourselves the Committee in Solidarity with the People of Syria.
Right.
And we were very active in support of Syria, and the Syrian American community here was with us all the way. And there is Jerry Condon, who is literally the vice president, later the president of Veterans for Peace, pushing the line of support for Assad as an anti-imperialist. Now, in the publications of Veterans for Peace, in particular, an online blog or an online but a place where Veterans for Peace members could write their opinions, I spoke out against Assad. And I argued for supporting the rebellion against him, the democratic rebellion against him. That earned the ire of Jerry Condon. Now, Jerry, as I've written in my blog, was, in my opinion, a heroic Vietnam War resistor. He had been in the Special Forces, Green Berets, and he refused to go to Vietnam. He was marshaled, jailed. He somehow escaped, spent at least 15 years in exile in Canada and Sweden before amnesty came under Jimmy Carter, and he was allowed to come back to the US, I'm sure with bad discharge papers. But he had every right to be very angry at the US government. Unfortunately, from that anger, perhaps, he adopted this infantile view, which unfortunately is popular in some elements of the US left, that the United States is the cause of all the evil that happen in this world, no matter what situation heck have. If the US is taking one position, you take the other side. Well, since we were on diametrically opposed positions, we fought it out, but it was fought out on this internal blog of Veterans for Peace. But he got extremely angry at me. I always tried to be very civil, recognizing that he had gone through some hell, 15 years in exile, away from family and friends, because of his courageous stand against the war in Vietnam. He continually targeted me, and at one point he blocked me. He had the authority to block me from posting to this internal group. In any case, more recently, with the developments going on in Ukraine, again, complete split, complete him and unfortunately much of the board of directors adopting the position that it was US and NATO were the cause of the war, and that the excuses that Putin was making, that we in Russia have legitimate security interests, that NATO has been coming to our borders, were the line that Jerry Condon and others, unfortunately, in the board of directors have taken. And the war of words, again, on this internal website, became very, very heated. Again, always polite. I got some horrible personal slander at me, anti-Semitic crap, vicious, I'm a CIA agent, reporting to the US government, and nothing was done about that. And finally, recently, an unfortunate incident where Medea Benjamin, who is promoting essentially the view that there needs to be a ceasefire that leaves the Russian troops in place and stops the resistance of the Ukrainian people, and then we'll talk. Well, I consider that to be surrender, asking them to surrender, stop resisting, but offer them nothing. And there was, when Medea Benjamin came to Minneapolis to speak, we called a demonstration. We got half a dozen people out there with our slogans, our placards. And when she came, we shouted our slogans and sang some songs. Unfortunately, some super militants of an anarchist tendency showed up and got into a fight, literally a couple of blows, a couple of punches. And it was broken up immediately. The police came, the police stayed there for a few hours, and that was the end of it. But they tried to tie it to me. Now, I was there. I wasn't involved at all with the fight. I have a daughter with a disability. And so when the fighting happened, which lasted no more than 2 minutes, I would say, I took my daughter far away from it. So I was nowhere near the fighting, nowhere. But I strongly suspect that it was tied to me somehow, because I was physically there with the people holding placards.
Well, let me break in here. Were you claiming that your demonstration was a Veterans for Peace demonstration?
You know, interesting, there were two of us, two members of Veterans for Peace.
Uh-huh.
The other fellow I was with wore such a hat, and he was in violation of that edict that you cannot go to a demonstration that is against the political line of the board of directors. And I just wore a little hat with a Ukraine flag. So I wasn't in violation of that at all. But I was never asked to talk about the charges that were made against me. As I think I sent you the letter telling me I'm expelled. There was no, I was not informed that I was under investigation. I was not informed that there was going to be a vote in the board of directors on expelling me. I was not informed at all. I was expelled. And then I was said, if I wish to appeal it, I can come to a meeting on such and such a date. Well, as I said in my letter, the fix was in. The decision had been made to expel me. After the fact, to say I could appeal without having been even informed or asked to defend myself prior to expulsion, there was no point. The decision was made. The board of directors is strongly now following this party line on Ukraine. And so I didn't see any reason, or I told them I will not be defending myself after the fact.
Who is the head of things now? Is Jerry Condon still the?
No, Jerry Condon, he's on the board of directors, and some others. Actually, this is another story. The president of the board of directors is Susan Schnall. Susan Schnall was a nurse in the Navy who at one point was an anti-war activist while she was a nurse in the Navy. And she was in a small airplane that flew over military bases in the Bay Area, dropping anti-war leaflets. So she got into trouble big time. She was court-martialed. I don't know why she turned into a supporter of the Putin line on Ukraine. I don't know what happened after that. But as I wrote to her, I heard about her dropping the leaflets on the shortwave radio when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Togo, Africa. And I was inspired by it. I was inspired. I was teaching math. I stopped teaching math for an hour, and I made my class, totally students, into a discussion about the war in Vietnam. But for some reason, she and others in the board of directors have essentially adopted the Putin line that the war in Ukraine was caused by NATO, and Russia is merely defending its vital interests.
Yeah, yeah. Now you, I guess was this year, you set up a kind of working group. I don't know if
Yes, yes.
Veterans
There
for
were
Peace.
two members of the board of directors that I don't know how many members there are on the board of directors, maybe a dozen or so, but there are two members that had doubts. And one of them in particular was very much opposed to it, to the very supportive of Ukraine. He actually started a group, a working group of members of Veterans of Peace who supported Ukraine. There was a group called the Russia Working Group that the board of directors had okayed. So we asked for a Ukraine working group. It was denied. So we were in the crazy position that Veterans of Peace had a Russia working group permitted, but a Ukraine work not permitted. So they outright banned us, said, no, you cannot call yourselves Veterans for Peace Ukraine working group, even though we had at that point a blog and let me show the flag.
Got it.
Got it?
Got it. Definitely. Thank you. Yep.
And they said they banned the flag. Said no. Well, at that point, Jeff and another fellow left the board of directors. I don't think he quit his membership. And other people, particularly a chapter of Veterans for Peace in Oregon, came out unanimously in support of Ukraine, opposing the banning of the Ukraine working group. As to my knowledge, no one else has been expelled. The fellow that was wearing the hat at the demonstration was suspended from the local chapter until the end of this year. But he's very angry and bitter, and I don't know what his future will be with the organization. But he was one of the founding members of the local chapter. So that's where it stands. I don't know of any effort to continue the fight within Veterans for Peace. On the other hand, I don't see much of organizing another organization or whatever against that position or in favor of Ukraine. There are a fair number of organizations. There are two major Ukraine solidarity organizations in the United States. And there's some terrific stuff going on abroad. And they have webinars and meetings, which I participate in. There's the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Network. There's the Ukraine Support Group. And then there's the European Network in Solidarity with Ukraine. And when you go on to they have webinars with Ukrainian speakers, and now can be heard by anyone on their webinars. They're giving voice to the Ukrainians. So that's where I've put my energies, in supporting those existing groups. I absolutely adore the European groups. It's amazing. They have their webinars in 3 languages. You look at the Zoom links and you see faces of people from 6 to 8 different European countries doing Ukraine solidarity work. And the only problem is the time zone. When they have their meetings, it's typically a very big 4 a.m. in the morning here, although occasionally they change it to evening meetings there so we can do it in the morning and participate. So there is good Ukrainian support work going on, and that's what I'm doing now. What happens in the future, I don't know.
And there's some interesting things or dates this month. On the 21st is the 10-year anniversary of the Ghouta sarin gas attack in Syria. And
Yes.
then I believe the 24th is Ukraine Independence Day. So
Correct.
I think things are going to happen. I want to thank you so much for this interview. So interesting.
Okay, well, it's my pleasure, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing to get the voice of truth out to the people.
We don't have time for all of this, but I think you'll find the earlier parts of the interview when we talk about his opposition to the Vietnam War while he was a U.S. soldier to be very interesting. Go to YouTube and search for The Struggle Video News. Syria. The White Helmets tell us about massive forest fires in Idlib. And Nidal el-Amari tweets that while Assad forces bomb Syria constantly, they don't have a single plane to douse flames of forest fires near area they occupy around Latakia. A grim reminder about the disappearance and certain murder in Syria 10 years ago. Father Paulo Dal Oglio was disappeared, probably by ISIS. This is a recent drawing of him by artist Mark Nelson. August 21st will be 10 years since the horrific sarin gas massacre in Ghouta, Syria. And you still see idiots claiming that Syrians did this to themselves to gain support. Mark your calendars. September 17th, a big rally planned in New York City to demand drastic measures to save livable climates. More in the weeks to come. That's our program for today. See you next time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle Video News.